Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Spatial Innovision Limited's monthly webinar. My name is Tanya Manasai. I am Vice President, Corporate Services Division here at Spatial. And Spatial is the leading geospatial products and solutions distributor in the English-speaking Caribbean. Today's presenter is Miss Nicola Simpson-Lake. She's a senior geospatial solutions specialist. Her topic is ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise, Architectural Patterns and Practices. ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise are Esri solutions that enable users to maximize geospatial information across their organizations and networks. We will explore the implementation guidelines that ensure that these products will meet your organizational objectives. So in today's webinar, we will focus on how the features of ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise facilitate a more effective design, configuration, and implementation of unique networks that harness spatial information. So welcome again, and over to you, Nicola.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As mentioned, we will be discussing the architectural patterns and practices of the ArcGIS Online and Enterprise platforms. My name is Nicola Simpson-Lake, and I will be your presenter for today. For our agenda this morning, we will first have a look at the ArcGIS system. Then we'll have a closer look at the platform through a crash course on ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise. I think we are all familiar with both platforms, but sometimes aren't sure how to explain the difference between the two, why you should be using one or the other, what are the opportunities or advantages that can be taken with either of these products. Now, the next topic and the main reason we're here today is to discuss the architectural patterns and practices. What do you want? What do you do with ArcGIS Online? What do you do with ArcGIS Enterprise? After which, we will look at additional resources, and this is to provide you with additional information on areas discussed today. Then we will open the floor for some questions from you. Now, just to note, we will be covering a lot of information this morning, so I'd like to recommend writing down your questions as we go along. ArcGIS supports three fundamental systems. These systems are the system of records, which deals with all data transaction. Then we have your system of insight, and this is where visualization and analysis are combined to accelerate decision making. And then finally, the system of engagement that deals with stakeholders and public engagement. GIS efficiently delivers all three on a single platform to not only allow our users to accurately represent and understand their data, but also allows you to provide secure and authoritative data for widespread government, private, and public use. So, taking a closer look at the ArcGIS system, we can look at it as a workflow. A lot of you probably have your data originating in a file geodatabase, an enterprise geodatabase, a table, some source of data. And most often, but not all the time, you may be adding it to ArcGIS Pro, you may be analyzing it there, you may be visualizing it there. And that's great if Pro is the desktop application you want to work with. But then it brings me to the whole area of how do you want to share this data? Do you want to share it with other users? maybe other people who don't have access to that file geodatabase. They don't have access to SQL Server or Oracle, whatever your organization is using. And that's when you can go to that process of publishing or sharing to ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise. Looking at the diagram, you notice the two are in a bracket together. And that's because oftentimes the sharing happens to one or the other. They can almost be used as interchangeable in this workflow. It's the backbone of really where you can set off your GIS workflow from there. It really is a foundation for where other apps, other parts of the ArcGIS system can connect in. So from ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise, you have your new layer that you had shared from ArcGIS Pro, or perhaps that you added directly within the organization itself. You have that layer, but you can share that out, or maybe you want to make a web map with it. You can make a web map, and then you can be using Map Viewer to visualize data added. Or you might want to share it out another step. That's where you can build your web applications. And that brings us into all the apps on the right that are really being able to digest those web maps and apps. So that can be something, even if it is just taking your map offline as a mobile worker using ArcGIS field maps. It can be something where maybe you want to analyze your data further, get further insights into data using ArcGIS Insights. You could even create a form out of it using Survey 123. There's a lot you can do. And even though we have only mentioned few apps, there are so many more products that are part of the ArcGIS system. Now, you will also see that Pro has an arrow going both ways, and that's because Pro is not only a desktop application, it share and publish data. It can also be a client. You can open those web maps in Pro as well. It's a client of online and enterprise. You will also notice on the bottom, there's an area for ArcGIS developers. Esri is aware that while there are plenty of products available in the ArcGIS system, sometimes you want something very specific that perhaps the apps and software cannot do. And that can get into the area where if you have developers or anyone who is interested in taking it a step further, tailoring it to what you need exactly in your organization. You can use Esri's runtime SDKs. Maybe you want an application specific for iOS users. Maybe you want to use JavaScript API. You want to create a web application, something to open in a browser that does exactly what you want. Because maybe the things that came with the enterprise portal or online doesn't quite suit your needs. There's a lot you can do within the ArcGIS system, and this is just a high level overview. Now we will move on and take a closer look at ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise. Please note this is not a comprehensive discussion on both. So referencing the diagram discussed earlier with online and enterprise being in the middle of the diagram, we consider them to be the backbone of the GIS system. They are the foundational applications for mapping and visualization, data management, spatial analysis, application building. Really, whatever your organization is looking to do, you can accomplish within our GIS enterprise and online. For this kind of workflow, or if you are looking for something that is browser based. And they are really the backbone of the GIS system. So when I mentioned that these web apps and mobile apps uses online and enterprise, you might access a web map or web app served out by a city and not even know that a online or enterprise is running it on the back end. As a mobile worker using field maps, you don't need to know that you're connected to online or enterprise because your administrator is there to make sure you are connected and can do your work out in the field. And the beauty of Esri's product is that they are designed to work with each other. You don't need to go through any interoperability. They are designed to be cohesive unit and work with one another, talk to one another, have that consistent experience throughout. Now, I've been talking about online and enterprise being the same thing. And even though they look very similar and they even share some of the same codes, they are two separate products that fulfill different needs. ArcGIS Online is Esri's SaaS product. It's a software as a service managed by Esri. So once your organization is set up, you log into a browser, you are good to go. No software installation required. You're not responsible for installation. You're not responsible for keeping it up and running. Esri maintain it for you. But also part of it is maintenance and it being a SaaS, it means there are automatic upgrades throughout the year. So one day you might log into your account and the workflow you had, one click might be a little bit different and this is because there was an update and you didn't have to maintain it. On the other hand, you have ArcGIS Enterprise, which is Ezra's software option. Install on an infrastructure that you control. And that could be in the cloud, whether it's private or public cloud. It can be on premises. It can be in AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud, or on a tower in your office. You decide to deploy it on. Sorry. It depends on the resources you need to take advantage of this and use enterprise. This setup is up to you, but there can be other concerns that you may not necessarily have it online. Thinking about who you're serving and what do you really want enterprise to do for your organization. And with this, it's very scalable to meet your needs. You are the one in control of this. And as mentioned, online has its updates throughout the year. And enterprise is when you feel it is appropriate for your organization. So for those who might have mobile workers in the field collecting crucial data, you may not want to do an update while they're out until they get their data checked in. You have that control, you make that call with enterprise. Also, with enterprise being on an infrastructure you control, that means it can be in your organization DMZ, it can be behind your firewall, it can be in front of your firewall. It has more ability to integrate with your IT policies that are in place for you to adhere to. It can be on the internet, you can remove it from the internet, it can be in a disconnected environment if this is something your organization need. You will not have this opportunity with ArcGIS Online. ArcGIS Online is available anywhere you have internet access. So also you could be thinking about where you want your data to be sitting in this situation. Are you okay with it going up into the cloud on ArcGIS Online? Do you need to have it somewhere where you know exactly where it is? There are a lot of consideration to be taken into account here. And even though online and enterprise are very different, there's a lot of the same things that you can do with them. There are a spectrum of tools you can use for building your web applications. It doesn't matter if you're considering yourself as a developer or not, there are options available to you. We can start with something that is no code. That would be instant apps and app templates. These are easier and quicker to use, no coding to minimal coding. For example, story maps. You simply plug in your web map, data, content, picture, and you're ready to go, creating incredible applications within minutes. Moving along the spectrum, further to the right, we have users who might want to use search from the instant app and also have the ability to do a quick route. And that is something you can't quite do with this application. And this leads us into app builders. We're now entering low code. You can plug in a geoprocessing services into your app builder. It's really easy to do, but it's a little bit more than you had to do with the quick instant app that you made from the map viewer. So after the geoprocessing service, you might want to do something else, like for instance, writing a custom widget, taking it to the next step. You can do even more customization if you want something very specific. This requires a little more effort and time, more fine grain control and coding. The use of SDKs, for instance, wanting to make a specific app for use on your mobile device. This can be done using our ArcGIS Runtime SDK. Also, a lot of our users are using JavaScript APIs to write specific web applications in the browser. There's a lot of options here for you. So, moving on from our apps, as mentioned earlier, there are a lot of things you can do with both ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise. Looking at the top level of the diagram, the client apps, this is probably where there are the fewest differences. The applications that work against online and enterprise, whether it's the web applications or the mobile and native applications, are very similar. For the most part, they're exactly the same. As we look at the middle tier, where you're doing content management, the actual organization of your data, your items, your applications that you've created using the different options mentioned earlier, again, is very similar between the two. There are subtle differences, especially as we're looking at across different versions. Again, the wider the gap between the version of ArcGIS Enterprise that you're using and the version of ArcGIS Online, you will start to see differences. There's typically more and more new features that come in, and that tends to show up more at the application level, of course, but also at the middle tier. Now, where there is the most differences between the two is at the bottom level. Excuse me. As we're talking about the content that comes with the system, as well as the services that you can create, services such as map services, feature services, and so forth that you publish using Pro or many of the other different types of applications. When we're looking at ArcGIS Online, you're handing your data over to the system. You are creating what we refer to as hosted feature services. With ArcGIS Enterprise, there's a wealth of different options where you don't necessarily have to hand over a copy of the data to the system and create one of those hosted feature services. You can reference your data in place in Enterprise geodatabase and file geodatabases and so forth. So, whereas with enterprise, you or your organization had to make a choice very early on. Where do I want to run the software? So, earlier I mentioned that you can run ArcGIS on a tower. That might work for a little while, but probably not a good long term solution. Instead, you're looking at a good old fashioned server sitting in a data center using a private cloud environment that your organization may already have. using public cloud environment like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, etc. Now, because that infrastructure needs to be not just architectured initially, it also needs to be installed. All of a sudden, when we talk about ArcGIS Enterprise, we tend to get very deep into the technology conversation about individual software component, how to wire them up, the actual experience of installing the software yourself. If you are a system administrator, odds are pretty good that you have been involved in wiring up all these different pieces to ultimately get what we call ArcGIS Enterprise setup. Now, when we are looking at the Windows and Linux option for ArcGIS Enterprise, there's a lot of individual pieces too. Whereas ArcGIS Online is just this. You type arcgis.com into your browser and something somewhere is responding to your request. There's an enormous amount of benefit to not having to go through an architecture conversation with your IT administrator and then having to not just install the software, but also maintain it. However, you don't have to choose between one or the other. That's really the main point of this presentation. For many, if not most of your organization, are using both for what they are really good at and can be a very powerful way of getting the best of both worlds. One of the example we very often encounter are organization where you've got mobile workers going out collecting data. By the very definition of out in the field, it means you're probably on a cell connection of some kind. You're not behind the firewall. Many times, those people going out in the field may be contractors, maybe temporary workers who don't have an account. So, getting them access to the VPN or whatever mechanism that gets them behind the firewall to potentially ArcGIS Enterprise can be a burden. Instead, using ArcGIS Online, which is accessible to anyone on the open internet, can be a very easy way to get in that data collected. After that, you can bring the data from online into enterprise and continue working. That's just one common example of using online for being that always accessible system versus enterprise that might be behind a firewall and have additional security requirements. There are lots of hybrid deployment patterns. None of them are inherently good or bad. It really depends on what it is that your organization is trying to do. So let's take a look at the high level architectural patterns for using ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise or both. So this really sums it up. It's a spectrum, it's a journey, not a destination. Even though somewhere in that middle, we've got ArcGIS Online icon connected to ArcGIS Enterprise, and everything is perfect as they both coexist together. This is not meant to imply that you must or should go to that middle option. Any one of these can be the right pattern for your organization. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish, as well as the skill set and investment you're interested in making in terms of running the software like ArcGIS Enterprise yourself. On the left-hand side, we have the pure use of ArcGIS Online. Your organization did not have to install any software, manage any software, worry about any kinds of upgrades. And then as we progressively move to the right, we are adding more and more different versions of the software. Using a standalone ArcGIS server where there is no portal in front of it alongside ArcGIS Online was a very common pattern for a long time and still is for many organizations. It allows you to connect to your local data, not having to make copies of it, but still taking advantage of the fact that ArcGIS Online is always upgraded, it's always there. The middle option, where you have both online and enterprise, is where you have the most flexibility. You can do whatever it is you want to do, but it also requires you to be thoughtful about what happens, what things happen in what system, what copies of data may be made or not. And you have, of course, the added burden of having to also maintain the software. You also have to explain to your users when the two are not necessarily the same. Now, why is it when I go to one system, Experience Builder does this, and then in another, there is a button that doesn't exist? That might seem odd to you. Well, that's because they are at two different levels. That has nothing to do with IT. That's just an inherent function of the system working on slightly different schedules. You can also use ArcGIS Enterprise as your primary and sole system, but still pulling in content from ArcGIS Online, such as the base maps. I bet most of you that are using primarily or entirely using ArcGIS Online are probably still using the Esri base maps. Most organizations don't create their own base map from scratch. Some do, obviously, but most of you are probably using the Esri base maps, and they are coming from ArcGIS Online backend. But you can go beyond base maps and use things from the Living Atlas. You can use the different content services, the different location services such as routing and geocoding without having to pull in your own street network, publishing your own routing network services, and so forth. Getting again a little bit of the best of both worlds. Then finally, on the far right of the spectrum, it's the fully disconnected environment. ArcGIS Enterprise running on a non-internet connected network. There's no such thing as internet in this scenario. It's its own little island. That is also a very valid pattern for some organization, whether it's for security reasons, for regulatory reasons. There are lots of ways that you might be pushed towards that pattern. As you're looking at ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise, there are more similarities than differences from an end user perspective. The differences come in when we start looking at it at the IT side of things. As mentioned, ArcGIS Online is, of course, software as a service, which means Esri controls the service level agreement. It's released 3 to 4 times per year. And when that happens, you wake up and the changes are simply there. For a lot of organization, that is very compelling reason to use ArcGIS Online, though some persons aren't always happy with the movement of a button, resulting in them having to redo their workflow or documentations or having to retrain staff members. The core web GIS functionality, the ability to visualize things in web map using all of the applications are exactly the same across both platforms. At the enterprise integration level, there are some subtle differences. They can both connect to external providers, but because ArcGIS Enterprise is running in your own infrastructure, it can also connect to some of the more traditional identity provider options, such as LDAP servers, directly connected to your Active Directory, as opposed to modern options like SAML and OpenID Connect, which are common between the two. We can do what is called web tier authentication. We can connect to those LDAP groups that many organizations are still using to organize their employees. So that direct connection to other systems within your infrastructure, that's a feature of ArcGIS Enterprise that we see a lot of customers going through. And finally, at the bottom of the list, ArcGIS Online comes with a lot of that Esri provided content. ArcGIS Enterprise doesn't ship with base map in the package, it ships with references out to the base maps in ArcGIS Online. To get base map in your own infrastructure, that takes more work. And Esri has offerings for it. You can create your own, but there is more to it than just clicking in the base map gallery. And then the very subtle but all encompassing bullet point at the end of the list for enterprise, which is advanced GIS functionality. ArcGIS Enterprise can be expanded with a lot of additional options that you've actually seen coming into ArcGIS Online progressively over the last few years with ArcGIS, with things like image server, ArcGIS Mission, ArcGIS Indoors, those kinds of things you can add on to Enterprise, and in some cases also ArcGIS Online. So there are lots of functionalities that are still today found in Enterprise only. Another important point I'd like to make is that picking the right pattern for your organization is indeed important. However, this is about much more than just the technology. The technology is, of course, an important part of it. You need you need to be able to take the technology and manage it and work with it. But that really gets directly into the people aspect of things. Do you have the IT organization in place with the right skill sets to be able to take the software, install it, and maintain it in whatever environment you're looking at? Do you want to run it in the cloud? Have you done that with other software? If not, there's a process before you get to even working with ArcGIS software to get to know the cloud environment that you're going for. There are the processes that you are probably subject to in many ways, processes around security, staying up to date, managing your people, your data, your content. Just because you get a system like ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise and can give 100 or 1,000 people in your organization the ability to upload, create applications or services, don't necessarily means you should. Because who then curate the content? Who keeps it up to date? Who retires it once it's done? There's also a whole aspect to the management of the system and the content beyond the IT side of things. And then there's the planning around getting started. What is the right option keeping it up to date? Everybody coming together across IT, GIS, and the rest of your business unit is vital to the development of your system and its maintenance. So, really, what are we talking about here? Is making sure that the technology is providing as part of online and enterprise with the needs as well as the skills of your organization. If we're talking about the ArcGIS enterprise, you need to make that decision. Is it physical machines? Is it virtualized environment? Is it cloud environment? Is it a combination of all the above? Again, for enterprise, you need to have a conversation about system architecture itself. Do I need one machine, 12 machines? How do I even know? How do I even begin to understand that conversation? And then that pattern probably should have been at the top before we even start talking about the number of machines. Did I need any machines at all? Am I just going to use ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise? If you are part of the GIS or IT departments, do you have commitments you need to make or want to make to the rest of the organization in terms of the service level agreement? What are the uptime commitments that you're going to be making? Is this a mission critical statement that really can't go down ever? Or is there a little bit more flexibility? The idea that every system is mission critical is a fallacy. If you ask somebody, do you want a highly available system? They are very likely going to say yes. Who doesn't? The right question is, what are you willing to invest in this system to reach the actual service level agreement that we desire? And can we do it? So, to talk a bit more about the SLA, we need to take a look at additional consideration for your organization: the who, the what, where, when, about how the people interact with your organization via ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise. For the GIS administrator in attendance today, starting from the very beginning of the process, how do people get access? How do they get an account? How do they get a name? How do they know how to log in? As mentioned earlier, there are lots of ways to log in. How do I know what my username and password are? So you have to think about the very beginning, the entry point into the system. I talk a lot about content. Content is one of those things that often determines what we are doing inside of the web GIS. Are we interacting with one map versus another? Are we interacting via an application embedded in another website? Once we get to that app, once we see that map, what can we actually do with it? Can we edit it? When we edit it, where are the edits being stored? Are they living in a hosted feature service, or are they coming into the enterprise to our geodatabase running in the cloud? So all of those workflow questions start to help formulate how we're going to use the WebGIS. I talked earlier on about ArcGIS Pro being both a client to the WebGIS, but also a tool that allows us to publish our data or maps or services. We want to think about those workflows, where we are getting our data from, how we want to move that data into our organization. Security is common and most important to your organization. We have the ability to define rules, privileges, and restrict access to our information. We need to be proactive when we think about who will see the map we publish. It's not okay to just accept the defaults. We need to consciously think about whether it is truly a map that needs to be published to everyone, a specific group of users, a specific department, a specific project team, whatever it might be. Now, most persons are intimidated by the last point on our list, and that's automation. Most persons feel like they don't have the required skills. But in all honesty, there are lots of ways to include automation into your business processes. That can be done by Python. Maybe you're scheduling a notebook to run overnight or on some set interval. Or maybe you're using webhooks built into the system. Esri also added new capabilities with Microsoft Power Automate, where you now have no code, low code environment, where you can now include additional automations, whether it's provisioning access to the system or moving data or manipulating data and working through your ETL processes. Again, we are talking about the people comment here. So we want to ensure that the GIS professionals who are responsible for curating that content, publishing the maps, the service, creating and building the applications, know how to interact with the other part of the organization so that everyone is getting the best possible use of the GIS. Users may not have the same level of experience with our tools. They may not have the same experience within the apps themselves. So various versions of the application will show the data in different ways depending on the audience. The expert users may see full attribution on their feature versus your executive may see dashboard that provide high level summaries to give them the information they need to make decisions. But again, we want to make sure that we are building the competency so that the use of WebGIS grows beyond just the GIS professionals and the use of the system can be used by all. It's also important to know who you need to work with. And this depends little about what you're doing inside your GIS. So if you're building an application for the engineering team, you may not be the expert on building infrastructure. So you depend on those subject matter experts to drive your requirements. They become the expert for your tools. The IT professionals are critical for making sure the system's operational. They are helping us to enforce things like governance, making sure that the policies are properly applied, patches are done, businesses are running full speed. And again, our users are paramount. You are the group that are touching the system every single day. You're the consumers of the tools driving requirements as well. Now let's talk a little bit about scaling. So back to the technology part of this, because scaling is a bit of a tough topic. There are lots of ways to scale inside of ArcGIS Enterprise. You can think about scaling in the context of partnering with your IT department. First and foremost, ArcGIS Enterprise runs in an infrastructure that you control. So that infrastructure may be on premise, it may be in the cloud. Wherever it may be, the ArcGIS Enterprise requires IT professionals to do something. That may mean standing up additional servers, installing additional GIS server roles. It may mean adding additional capabilities and capacity to your existing systems. So whether that is additional RAM, additional CPU, scaling with ArcGIS Enterprise means partnering with your IT organization. It's not just always about supporting more users, it's also about supporting more workflows. So maybe your initial deployment of ArcGIS Enterprise only contained a GIS server. Maybe you could support certain workflows and you had no interest at the time in working with imagery. Fast forward 3 years later, you may have new requirements that demands the addition of a new server. And that server purpose is to support an image server. So adding additional server rules is going from a normal availability site to high availability site, tightening your SLA. Whatever it might be, it requires a close partnership with IT. Now, this is very different in ArcGIS Online because in ArcGIS Online, your partner is your organization administrator. It's the person that knows the ins and out of your organization. They know what comes in that comes with your organization, how it's set up, how many licenses you have available, how many name users you have available. They know your credit count, they know when you're getting a batch of credits. So it is important to know what your organization actually comes with. Ways to scale in ArcGIS Online? Well, you can always purchase additional capacity. That could be in the form of credits. It could be in the form of premium featured data store. It could also be in the form of additional capability, something like ArcGIS Velocity. Just like in the enterprise model, you might add an additional server role. You have the ability to do that in ArcGIS Online. Perhaps in licensing with additional user types, you didn't have a need for field worker initially, but you have a new project that demands that user type. There are always ways to scale in ArcGIS Online, and we encourage you to think about these in addition to what you have today. Now, maintenance is key. It is critical. When your system is not operating the way thought it was going to, this is where our support teams get called in the most. This is because your system needs to be maintained. It needs to be taken care of. It's just like your car. You have to take it in for a tune up. It needs an oil change. Things change over time as they get older. The operating system and technology is no different. If you are adding additional services, if you are adding additional capacity to your system, you need to make sure the system is being patched and upgraded. You need to know what is happening. You know if it's okay. This is all to reduce risk, all about making sure the system is online and performing the way you would expect. We talk a lot about the default. You publish that service with a default number of instances and never touched again. Is that okay now that you may have 20 more services? Is that first service still being used today as much as it was back then? If not, maybe we should do something about that. Governance is key here. And this is the point that we want to take home, because with governance, we can mitigate some of these issues that might arise by overwhelming your deployment of ArcGIS Enterprise. We are all guilty of publishing lots of services, maps, and apps called tests. But what does that mean when it comes time to making sure we have to do an upgrade? There are now more stuff we have to upgrade, things we have to upgrade that we are not necessarily using on a day-to-day basis. Now, as far as additional resources are concerned, specifically around monitoring our environment, we want to put a little plug in here for ArcGIS Monitor. ArcGIS Monitor, for those who know it, is a great tool. For those who are new to this tool, it's available as an add-on in that you can install ArcGIS Monitor as a piece of software that gives you insight on your underlying ArcGIS Enterprise deployment and this infrastructure. So it's not just going to tell us about how the services are being used, when they're being used, but it's also going to tell us when we are running out of disk space, when our CPU is overtasked. Now, it's not just because of the GIS, but because of some bogus antivirus process that is now using all of our CPU, because something else is going wrong on the system that we weren't expecting. So it gives us metric. It gives us a nice dashboard to view that information over time. So we can monitor the health of the system, and we can proactively receive alerts via email, for example. Overall, this is one of those tools that helps us improve the system performance and availability. So we talk about SLAs. This is one of those critical tools for making sure systems are up and running. Now, these are some additional resources that can be of help to you after this webinar. There are Esri Tech papers providing you with additional information on areas discussed today. You can take a picture of them, but they will also be available on our YouTube channel, which Tanya will talk more about when closing out this session. We have come to the end of our webinar, and we would like to thank you for joining us today. On screen, you will see some names of those who contributed to this presentation, as well as my contact information. Please feel free to contact me for additional information. Now, at this time, I will open the floor for questions. Please type them in the chat available.